And here's Adam. So I've just introduced myself. I opened for myself, I should say. And today I'm really excited to welcome you to the Adam Kiss Show, where I'm going to talk about one of my favorite movies, Citizen Kane. What can I say about Citizen Kane? It is a legendary movie. Even if you haven't seen it, I'm sure you've heard about it. I'm sure that people have mentioned it. It consistently makes it on the lists of the greatest movies ever made. It's definitely consistently on my list of the greatest movies ever made. And any excuse I have to talk about this movie, I take it. So without further ado, let's get right into talking about Citizen Kane. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Adam Kiss Show. So, before we get right into it, I just wanted to take a moment to ask you to please subscribe to the channel, like, share, comment on this video. Feel free to comment what other videos you'd like me to do, some other film topics, filmmaking topics, anything at all. I'm here for you. So, let me set the stage for you. Citizen Kane. Orson Welles is 24, 25 years old. He's a star in New York on the stage with his Mercury Theater. He became famous for doing his famous War of the Worlds broadcast, where people actually thought they were Martian invaders in the 1930s. And he was notorious for that. He was gaining a lot of recognition. He did a lot of Broadway performances, starring and directing. And naturally, Hollywood came calling. He didn't necessarily want to do a Hollywood production. He didn't necessarily want to do a feature film. At least that's what he claimed. So it was easy for him to say no. He kept saying no, and it seemed like he actually didn't want to do it. And because of that, the offers kept getting bigger and bigger. And finally, they just gave him the blank check and said, do whatever you want. We'll give you complete creative control, which was unheard of at the time. I repeat, that was unheard of. It's unheard of these days, but it was really unheard of in those days to give a director the final cut of a movie, complete creative control. And I don't believe that, certainly not with any other major studio, he never had that privilege again. His movies were always recut afterwards. Without his approval, he was almost never invited into the editing room, at least for the final cut or for revisions later on. So it was a privilege that he only enjoyed this one time. He often said later on that his movies either work on his terms or on no terms. So in a certain way, even unselfishly, he was saying that his movies probably don't even work if he's not involved with the editing. And that's why a lot of them did end up being successful later on, and then some didn't. And we can only imagine, like with certain movies like Touch of Evil, they were re-edited later on to try to fit what he had intended. Of course, we don't know exactly what he intended, but the original cut of Touch of Evil that was released in the US theatrically was very different than the version which is now commonly released, which is the more definitive director's cut. But we digress. Touch of Evil is a later film. Citizen Kane, a great movie. So eventually he accepted because the deal was just too good. The final cut privilege, he didn't necessarily fight for an extreme financial advantage. He fought for the power and the power to do his artistic vision in the movie. So that was his main focus. He came out to Hollywood, and the deal was that he had Herman Mankiewicz start on the screenplay. Mankiewicz was a very famous screenwriter. He was also a former friend of Hearst, who created the Hearst newspapers, who built Hearst Castle in California, all of that. So it's kind of probably through his influence that the character of Charles Foster Kane was based on Hearst, at least partially. I mean, Welles has said so many times that the character wasn't really based on Hearst, and I'm inclined to believe that. I mean, yes, it was based a little bit on Hearst, probably the most of that through Mankiewicz's influence in the script. One topic that's often debated is whether Welles contributed to the screenplay, or how much he did, or how much either of them did. Obviously, none of us were there. There's been even a movie about that, citing Mankiewicz's side of the story. There have been other documentaries and movies showing more of Orson Welles' side of the story. So again, we don't know. It's pretty clear that Mankiewicz, I believe, began writing the screenplay, and then Welles made contributions, sent it back to Mankiewicz. Mankiewicz sent it back to Welles. So I do believe there was collaboration there. Again, I was not there, so I do not know. But they were both credited with the screenplay. I know that originally in the contract it was just supposed to be Welles credited for the screenplay, but then they ended up sharing credit. It was, in the screen credit, it says Mankiewicz first, then Welles second. So again, there's a lot of controversy surrounding that, but I honestly believe that they did both contribute. I know that this is a very polarizing issue, but again, if we're not there, we can't know. No matter what, though, Wells's vision was very much throughout the movie. I mean, his direction was great in the film. It was, at the end of the day, his story. He told it cinematically, despite being a first-time director. And that brings me to another point, the fact that he was a first-time director, certainly of a feature film here. Greg Toland, who was one of the best cinematographers in Hollywood at the time, he actually approached Wells and wanted to be in the movie, wanted to be the cinematographer for the movie for the specific reason that he thought that Wells didn't know what he was doing, so he didn't know what wasn't possible. And Toland was at that point in his life when he wanted to test the boundaries. He wanted to be adventurous, he wanted to explore new things. And so a lot of the credit for Citizen Kane does go to Greg Toland, who kind of guided Wells through the process. I mean, Orson Welles said in so many interviews, on so many occasions, that the technical aspects of filmmaking you can learn in a day and a half. And he said that Greg Toland told him that, and that they actually took the day and a half, and Toland literally taught him. And so Wells was definitely on the learning curve. I mean, I remember in another interview with Wells, I've seen a bunch of interviews with Wells. I absolutely love them. But I remember in another interview, he was mentioning how in the first 2 weeks of filming, he was the person who was moving around the lights because he thought that's what the director did. And that his cinematographer was behind him fixing things up after him. And eventually somebody told him, and he figured out that that's actually not what the director does in a film. But it's kind of amusing to think of Wells just kind of moving lights around, trying to do things. And the cinematographer wouldn't tell him that that's not how it's done, because he kind of wanted to see, hey, what's he doing? You know, what kind of thing is he going for? So again, that's really a match made in heaven. Those two, it really came together great for a partnership. They never ended up working together again. Toland ended up working on a lot of other great movies, like The Best Years of Our Lives, a great movie starring Frederick March, a post-World War II movie. So again, they both went on to do great things later on separately. So another great actor who was in the movie was Joseph Cotten. He collaborated with Welles a lot in the Mercury Theater in New York, and he also collaborated with Welles later on in The Third Man, which was not directed by Welles, which was directed by Carol Reed, but where they both played opposite each other, and they always have a great dynamic on screen. Here, Cotten plays the friend of Orson Welles' character, kind of serving as a foil, kind of the Horatio to Orson Welles' Hamlet in a way. They really play off each other well. I know that there's the famous scene after the scandal where Welles' character is involved in a scandal where Joseph Cotten's supposed to be drunk, and he actually mispronounces a few words, and the reason for that was not intentional. He was actually kind of drunk and tired in real life, and they ended up keeping it in. So again, sometimes, realism is great, when what's happening on screen mirrors what's happening in real life. Sometimes those are the big magic moments. In terms of the story of Citizen Kane, I'm not here to give away any spoilers. I generally don't do spoiler-heavy reviews on here. But it's a story of the American dream. It's a story of a man's life, what he takes with him, what he remembers, what he leaves behind, all things like that. It's very symbolic, and it essentially shows him from childhood through young adulthood, his rise in prominence, and again, his fall from grace. That's essentially it, which is a lot. There's definitely a lot there. It is definitely not chronological. The story skips backward and forward in time so many times. As a matter of fact, it opens with a newsreel that basically gives away the entire story. So it's not really about the story. We know what happens within the first 20 minutes of the movie. It's about reactions to that. It's about delving deeper into certain areas. It's about different people's perspective on things, which is definitely another great aspect to it. Orson Welles is obviously the protagonist, but there's so many great characters throughout. The person who plays the news reporter who goes searching for Kane's story, because Orson Welles' character is named Charles Foster Kane. This news reporter, the funny thing about him is he goes through the whole story, but you never actually see his face. You see everything through his perspective, but I believe that Welles intentionally wanted the audience to kind of see themselves as this reporter discovering the story. So his face is always in shadow, or you see the back of his head. I believe that at the premiere, this actor actually mentioned, funnily, that, he turned around and said, okay, maybe you'll recognize me now, showing the back of his head. So again, and in terms of direction, It's really beautifully directed in terms of the not just the cinematography and the camera angles, which are absolutely fantastic. And one interesting thing is that this was one of the first movies where you could see ceilings in a movie. Previously, you didn't really see that because that's where the lights were, that's where the mics were. But Orson Welles, he wanted kind of to show kind of the power of certain characters, from that low angle looking up. And because of that, showing ceilings, which were sometimes just made of cloth. So they were sometimes soft ceilings with lights and microphones above there. But they absolutely did the job. There's definitely some iconic shots in there. If you see it, it's not a traditionally shot movie. There's a very sparing use of close-ups, which is totally opposite of today. Today you see nothing but close-ups in films. For Citizen Kane, if someone gets a close-up, you better believe it means something. There's a lot of medium shots, a lot of wide shots. One favorite scene of mine is when they're having the party at the office, when they're playing the song. And that's kind of really the height, the peak of his success, and even at that moment, Joseph Cotton's character is kind of being a little bit negative, saying, I don't know, is all this success going to go to his head? He's kind of being he has a little more pause about the whole situation. In other words, the movie is beautifully shot, beautifully directed, has a great screenplay, great performances. So what more can you ask for? It's definitely one of my favorite movies of all time, if not my favorite movie of all time. It's always served as an inspiration to me in many ways. I've never done a story like it, or filmed in an exact style like that, but that doesn't mean that it can't have its influence on me, just in its incredible style and its tone and what it's done for cinema. Great. So that's all I've got for now. Be sure to follow me on all social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, all the platforms. Subscribe to this channel, like and comment below what other videos you'd like me to see, and hit that bell notification so you'll be notified whenever I make a new video. That's all, folks.